Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. South Korean officials have met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington as both sides look to reach a breakthrough on a trade deal. The presidential chief of staff for policy said the meeting produced some progress, but said nothing is over until it's truly over. South Korea's central bank has decided to keep its interest rate steady amid soaring housing costs and the weakening Korean won against the dollar. A day after launching ballistic missiles toward the East Sea, North Korea this morning claimed it has tested a new weapon system, saying 2 hypersonic projectiles successfully hit their intended targets. We begin this morning with trade talks between South Korea and the United States. The two sides appear to be nearing the final stages of negotiations over a multi-billion-dollar trade and investment deal, but a few sticking points still remain. Officials say talks in Washington this week produced some progress as both sides look to reach a breakthrough. Our Muniran starts us off.
South Korea's presidential chief of staff for policy Kim Yong-bum and industry minister Kim Jong-wan met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington for about 2 hours on Wednesday for the second round of in-person negotiations in less than a week. The discussions focused on the $350 billion investment package, a key part of the broader trade framework between the two countries. After the meeting, Policy Chief Kim said some progress was made, but stressed that negotiations are still ongoing.
There has been some progress. If we can meet more frequently before APEC, both sides will better understand each other's positions. But as always, in negotiations, nothing is over until it's truly over.
The talks are believed to have centered on the cash ratio and funding duration of the investment plan. The policy chief said that any agreement must remain within what South Korea can afford financially, without causing instability in the foreign exchange market, while the industry minister said that meeting face-to-face was crucial to resolving the few remaining issues.
There are still pending issues. While we've discussed them online, we thought meeting in person would be far more effective, so we decided to come.
Meanwhile, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol, who has been negotiating with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, told Bloomberg TV that the focus is on structuring the $350 billion investment rather than on establishing a currency swap. He added that Seoul is working towards a balanced mix of direct investment, loans and guarantees, noting that a full upfront payment could shock the Korean foreign exchange market. Koo also emphasized that resolving the tariff gap, currently 25% for Korean vehicles versus 15% for Japanese ones, would help reduce uncertainty and stabilize the Korean won. With the South Korea-U.S. summit expected to take place during the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju at the end of the month, Wednesday's talks likely mark the final push as both sides work to seal a deal. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And the Bank of Korea has left the country's key interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the third consecutive time. This comes after the Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong said during a parliamentary audit on Monday that the central bank intends to prevent additional liquidity from overheating the property market. Lee also will hold a press conference later this morning to address key economic issues, including housing, loans, and exchange rates. The interest rate gap between South Korea and the United States remains in the 1.5 to 1.75 percentage point range. Now, for more on the reason behind the Bank of Korea's decision to keep the country's interest rate steady, we're joined today by Professor Lee Yoon-soo, Professor of Economics at Seogang University. Professor Lee, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
So, as widely expected, the central bank has decided to leave its key interest rate unchanged. What's behind this decision?
So there are several reasons behind the decision to keep the rate unchanged at 2.5%. First, external financial stability, particularly the exchange rate, has become a top priority. The Korean won has become volatile recently, partly due to the uncertainty over trade policy. especially the questions surrounding the $350 billion investment agreement between Korea and the U.S. In this environment, the bank wanted to avoid adding further instability to the currency market. Second, the government has just announced very strong measures to cool down the housing market. The BOK has repeatedly cited elevated home prices in Seoul and the surrounding market as a major concern. Cutting rates now could have sent the wrong policy signal and fueled renewed speculation in real estate market. Third, the growth inflation outlook gives the bank some room to wait because the inflation is still average 2%, roughly in line with its target. So the decision was a very cautious one, aimed at maintaining both financial stability and housing market stability. And there is still large uncertainty remains, so we have to watch out.
Right, and when can we expect the central bank to start cutting rates? Could it possibly happen next month?
Yeah, there is a strong market consensus that BOK could begin cutting rates as early as November 2025, because the recent poll by Reuters and other medias indicate that 25 out of 31 economists expect the BOK will lower its base rate by 25 basis points from 2.5 to 2.25%. The main driver will be Korea's weakening domestic demand and the heavy interest rate burden on households and small firms. At the same time, the inflation has slowed to around 2% range, close to the BOK target. However, the bank will move cautiously. The key condition for a rate cut is confirmation that housing prices are stabilizing, since the renewed real estate speculation could undermine policy credibility. Another factor will be the direction of the U.S. Federal Reserve. If the Fed signals another modest cut in coming meeting, this will give the BOK more room to follow.
Right, and speaking of housing prices and the housing market, like you just mentioned, last week the government rolled out stronger measures to tame housing prices, tightening mortgage limits, and designated all areas of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province as regulated zones. How is the housing market reacting to this, and do you think these measures will be effective?
Yes, these new housing measures announced on October 15 were among the toughest we have seen over years. All of Seoul and large areas of Gyeonggi province are now regulated, and you need a permit to buy a house apartment in these areas. And they also sharply tightened mortgage limit, especially for homes priced above 2.5 billion Korean won. The market has cooled dramatically in just 1 week. The transactions of high-end apartments fell by nearly 90%, and even mid-prices houses are seeing lower asking prices. These policies will likely bring short-term stability and curb the speculation, but the market thinks that these effects may be only temporary. In the medium term, structural imbalance still remain. Housing supply is still limited, and the weak sales could push rents higher as a lot of landlords shift from jeonse, that is Korea's lump sum large deposit lease system, to monthly rent. The jeonse market has getting a lot of pressure. So this is very difficult for tenants to find affordable long-term lease. So if transactions stay weak for too long, we could see rental pressure rise. So while these measures may be working for now, as long as the structural imbalance between supply and demand remains, the risk is still remains in the market. So eventually, wealthy cash buyers could return once the market adjusts, and that may create another round of price rebound.
Right, and while that's happening, gold prices hit record highs recently, but it dropped over 5% this week, and this was the steepest daily drop in almost 5 years since the pandemic. What's behind this?
Yes, the gold has been surging to record high this year, especially second half of this year. But the drop was very dramatic, and there are several reasons behind the reversal. First, the gold metal had become extremely overbought after its rapid rally. Such conditions usually invite profit-taking by investors. Second, the appeal as safe haven asset has weakened over time. There are signs of improving trade relations between U.S. and China. Plus, there was a modest rebound in risk asset. This reduced the urgency for some investors to hold gold. Third, the U.S. dollar has strengthened recently. This tends to weigh on gold because gold becomes more expensive in other currencies. And there was speculation that the interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve may be pushed out, but I think this speculation is disappearing. So overall, the plunge is likely a technical correction, and we saw that the sentiment can shift very quickly. But this is not a collapse of the investment thesis for the gold. The long-standing fundamentals for the gold rally, such as inflation concern, geopolitical risk, and the central bank demand switching their diversification, these factors remain supportive, so investors need to monitor these factors closely over time.
I see. All right, Professor Lee, thank you so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
North Korea this morning claimed it has successfully tested 2 hypersonic projectiles, calling them a part of a new and important weapon system, after the South Korean military said it detected 2 ballistic missiles launched by the regime the day before. Both the United States and the European Union slammed the latest missile test, calling it unlawful. Our Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
North Korea announced Thursday that it successfully test-fired 2 hypersonic projectiles, describing them as part of a new and important weapons system. According to the Korean Central News Agency, the 2 projectiles were launched the day before from Yeokpo District in Pyongyang toward the northeast and hit their intended target on the Gwaesang Peak tableland in Arirang County, North Hamgyong Province. The KCNA said the test was part of the country's broader defense capability development program, designed to strengthen the sustainability and effectiveness of what Pyongyang calls its strategic deterrence against potential enemies. While top military officials were at the test site to observe, the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un, was not. This marks the first ballistic missile test by North Korea in 167 days since the regime fired multiple short-range missiles, including the Hwasong-11 on May 8th. It also comes just days before the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Gyeongju, where leaders from South Korea, the United States, and China are expected to discuss the North's growing missile threats. In response, the United States condemned the launches, calling them unlawful and destabilizing. A spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Defense said Washington is closely consulting with South Korea, Japan, and regional allies following the test, reaffirming America's ironclad security commitment to its partners in Northeast Asia. The spokesperson added that the U.S. strongly urges Pyongyang to refrain from further provocations. In Europe, EU Foreign Affairs spokesperson Anita Hipper also condemned the missile tests on social media, calling them a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. She stated that North Korea must cease all unlawful actions that threaten peace and security, return to diplomacy, and fulfill its international obligations. The latest test underscores heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula as Pyongyang seeks to demonstrate its military capabilities ahead of key international discussions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, the United States has imposed the first Ukraine-related sanctions on Russia since the start of its second term, marking a sharp policy shift. The Trump sanctions announced on Wednesday target Russia's two largest oil giants, Lukoil and Rosneft, as frustration grows over the ongoing war in Ukraine. The U.S. Treasury Department said it is prepared to take further action and urged Moscow to agree to an immediate ceasefire. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the companies directly fund what he called the Kremlin's war machine, as he encouraged U.S. allies to follow suit. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump also said Wednesday that he has canceled a planned summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, citing a lack of progress in diplomatic talks and saying the timing didn't feel right. Trump expressed frustration over what he described as stalled negotiations, saying that while his conversations with Putin are always good, they failed to produce results. Meanwhile, Seoul is currently hosting its annual semiconductor exhibition, bringing together more than 200 global semiconductor manufacturing and equipment manufacturers, while offering a comprehensive look at the latest chip technologies. Our Moon Ji-young was there.
In the midst of a paradigm shift driven by AI, the future competitiveness of the semiconductor ecosystem is becoming increasingly crucial. Against this backdrop, marking its 27th anniversary, the semiconductor exhibition commenced in Seoul on Wednesday, showcasing the entire spectrum of the semiconductor industry's supply chain. In the AI era, with semiconductor technology at the core, this year's event highlights a seamless integration of Korea's semiconductor ecosystem, design, manufacturing, and post-processing. Samsung Electronics unveiled a physical HBM4, a sixth-generation high-bandwidth memory chip. The company has not only completed development of its 12-layer HBM4, but is also actively accelerating preparations for mass production. Furthermore, Samsung showcased its broad portfolio, ranging from the 7th-generation GDDR7 graphics DRAM, currently supplied in large volumes to NVIDIA, to advanced system semiconductors and foundry services. Meanwhile, another industry leader, SK hynix, prominently positioned its HBM4 exhibition at the booth center. Notably, the company had already supplied HBM4 samples to key customers such as NVIDIA as early as March, outpacing its competitors. It also introduced innovative memory module solutions specifically optimized for data centers and AI servers, alongside advanced storage solutions tailored for AI data centers and cloud infrastructure. Beyond these industry giants, Family's firms showcase their latest innovations, including intellectual property technology, logic processing units, and vehicle-to-infrastructure solutions. Furthermore, domestic materials, parts, and equipment companies demonstrated their advanced manufacturing technologies, underpinning the entire semiconductor production process. Running through this Friday, the show brings together 280 global semiconductor manufacturing and equipment companies exhibiting across 700 booths and is expected to attract more than 60,000 industry professionals. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In Washington on Wednesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that the U.S. military carried out an airstrike on Tuesday night in the eastern Pacific Ocean, destroying a suspected drug-carrying vessel and killing 2 people. It is the 8th U.S. strike against alleged cartel boats since operations began last month, and is the first strike outside the Caribbean. A total of 34 people have been killed by the airstrikes. The U.S. Defense Secretary compared the airstrikes to the post-9/11 war on terrorism, saying, quote, "These cartels are waging war on the border and our people. There will be no refuge or forgiveness." The Trump administration claims the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels, designating them unlawful combatants under the same legal authority used in the war on terror. Some members of Congress are now demanding oversight, questioning the legality and transparency of the airstrikes. In New York on Tuesday, an immigration enforcement sweep in Manhattan's Chinatown spiraled into chaos when a crowd of residents surrounded federal agents, blocking vehicles and clashing with officers during rush hour. The confrontation began around 4 p.m. as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Border Control, and other federal agents moved along Canal Street, detaining vendors accused of selling counterfeit goods. A news reporter witnessed officers arresting at least one vendor selling phone cases before protesters gathered chanting, quote, "ICE out of New York." According to the Department of Homeland Security, at least one person was arrested for assaulting an officer during the operation. New York City officials said Mayor Eric Adams had no prior knowledge of the sweep, condemning it as a misuse of law enforcement resources. In western Uganda early Wednesday, at least 46 people were killed and dozens more were injured when two buses and two other vehicles collided on the highway between Kampala and Gulu near the town of Kirandongo. The crash happened just after midnight Tuesday local time when both buses tried to overtake a truck and a car and slammed head-on to each other. A Ugandan Red Cross spokesperson described scenes of, quote, bleeding victims and broken limbs, calling it one of the country's most devastating road accidents. Authorities say reckless overtaking and speeding remains the leading cause of crashes on Uganda's narrow highways. Investigators are continuing to examine the cause of the crash. Researchers in the U.S. have found that some COVID-19 vaccines may help cancer patients live longer. The researchers at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and the University of Florida found that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines may help some cancer patients by strengthening their immune response to treatment. The study, published on Wednesday in the journal Nature, analyzed nearly 1,000 patients with advanced lung and skin cancer taking checkpoint inhibitor drugs. Those who received an mRNA vaccine within 100 days of starting therapy had significantly higher survival rates, with lung cancer patients' 3-year survival rates nearly doubling. Scientists say the mRNA molecule that powers the vaccines act like a siren, activating immune cells throughout the body. The findings are preliminary, but researchers are planning larger trials to test pairing mRNA vaccines with cancer immunotherapy.
We welcomed the season's first autumn foliage on Bukhansan Mountain yesterday, one day earlier than last year, but a week later than average. Today marks a Sanggang, meaning frost falls, but we are settling back into mild seasonal autumn weather after early winter-like conditions we've had. Meanwhile, rain is continuing today on the East Coast with up to 100 millimeters expected for the northeastern parts of Gangwon-do province through tomorrow. In fact, Gangneung in Gangwon-do, which had been dealing with severe drought, is now seeing its 20th consecutive day of autumn rain. This morning felt much more comfortable, and highs will also go up higher, topping out at 19 degrees here in the capital, Daegu at 21 degrees under mostly sunny skies in most regions. Then most of the country will enjoy classic mild autumn weather through the weekend. Then the intense early winter chill returns early next week, with Seoul's morning lows dropping down to just 2 degrees by Tuesday morning.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.